A single mother found herself sleeping in her car with her 3 children for several nights in a row. She didn't reach out to the police. She didn't contact a shelter. She didn't call anyone at all. Then, one evening, a billionaire's driver tapped gently on her window, but not for any reason she could have expected. What unfolded next would transform both of their lives in ways neither of them was prepared for. Elena Voss was in her mid-30s. She worked as a certified nursing assistant at Riverside Senior Care in Memphis, Tennessee. 5 days a week she arrived early, changed adult diapers, lifted patients twice her weight, rubbed lavender lotion into hands that had forgotten how to hold anything, and spoke softly to people whose own families had long since stopped visiting. She earned a modest hourly wage with no benefits, no overtime, and no sick days she could actually afford to take. She had 3 children. Malik was around 10, quiet and watchful, the kind of boy who noticed things other children his age missed, like when his mother skipped dinner and claimed she wasn't hungry, or when she checked her phone with that particular look that meant another bill was due and the money simply wasn't there. Malik carried things he never spoke about. He had learned early that silence could be a form of protection. Sienna was 7. She drew constantly. Butterflies, houses, families standing in front yards with trees that looked like lollipops. She asked questions the way children do, without realizing some of them had no good answers. "Where's Daddy? When are we getting a dog? Can I have my own room someday?" Kai was 3. He laughed at everything. He cried hard and forgave instantly. He had no idea what was happening around him, and Elena was determined to keep it that way for as long as she possibly could. Their father, Jalen Reed, had left when Kai was only a few months old. He hadn't left for another woman or because of drugs or trouble with the law. He left because he said the pressure was too much. 3 children, 1 income that never stretched far enough, bills that multiplied faster than they could be paid. He said he needed space to figure himself out. He never came back. Elena didn't waste energy hating him. Hate required time she didn't have. She had been doing this alone for nearly 3 years, waking alone, solving problems alone, falling asleep in the dark, running numbers in her head alone. She had grown used to it the way a person grows used to a limp. After a while, you stop noticing. It simply becomes how you walk. The landlord sold the building on an ordinary weekday. Elena found the notice taped to her door when she returned from a long shift. She had a month to leave. No exceptions. No extensions. She called every affordable listing in Memphis that week. First month, last month, security deposit. The minimum for anything with 2 bedrooms and working heat came to thousands she didn't have. She had only a few $100s in her checking account and had already borrowed from everyone she could. There was no one left to call. On the final day of the month, she loaded what she could fit into her old Honda Civic. The car had well over 100,000 miles, rust along the wheel wells, and a crack in the windshield that had been there since before Malik was born. She folded the back seats down and laid out a thin blanket. 3 small backpacks, a bag of snacks from the dollar store, granola bars, juice boxes, animal crackers, baby wipes, a change of clothes for each child. That was everything. The car became their home. Her scrub still carried the faint scent of lavender lotion she rubbed into Mr. Henderson's hands every morning at Riverside. She still showed up to work, still smiled, still lifted and cleaned and comforted people who had no idea that the woman gently adjusting their pillows had slept in a parking lot the night before. She organized life inside that car like a careful system. Malik sat in the front passenger seat once the younger ones fell asleep. Sienna held Kai in the back on the folded blanket. Elena slept last, always last, after checking every lock, after scanning every shadow outside the windows, after making sure each child was breathing evenly and covered and still. "My kids don't know we're homeless," she told herself on the first night, staring at the parking lot lights through the windshield. "They think we're camping." She held on to that sentence like a rope over a canyon. As long as her children believed they were on an adventure, she hadn't failed them yet. The first night was almost manageable. Elena pulled into a large store parking lot late in the evening. She chose a spot near the back, away from the brightest lights, but close enough to the main road that she wouldn't feel completely alone. A few other cars sat in the same stretch. No one inside looked up. In Memphis, people sleeping in parking lots weren't unusual enough to draw attention. She turned off the engine. The heat died within minutes. Malik sat in the passenger seat, his backpack on his lap, watching her. He hadn't asked a single question since they loaded the car that afternoon, not where they were going, not why they weren't going to his aunt's, not why she had packed blankets instead of suitcases. He simply watched. 10 years old and already fluent in the language of things left unsaid. "We're going to do something fun tonight," Elena said, keeping her voice bright and steady. "We're going camping, a little family adventure." Sienna's face lit up from the back seat. "Like real camping?" "Just like real camping," Elena answered. Kai clapped his hands, because Sienna was excited, and at 3 years old, that was all the reason he needed. Elena spread the blanket across the folded back seats. She arranged the backpacks as pillows. She tucked Sienna and Kai together under the thickest cover she had, a fleece throw from the apartment that still smelled faintly of home. She handed Sienna a juice box and Kai a cracker and told them a story about a bear who lived in the woods and hosted a party for all the forest animals every Friday night. Kai was asleep before the bear sent out invitations. Sienna lasted until the raccoon brought potato salad. Then she was out too. Elena sat in the driver's seat. The cold crept in slowly, first through the floor, then through the windows, then through her clothes. She pulled her jacket tighter. She locked the doors. She checked the mirrors. She did not sleep. Malik didn't sleep either. He sat in the passenger seat for a long time, staring out the window at nothing. Then he turned to her. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby." He paused. She could see him choosing his words carefully, the way he always did, the way no child his age should have to. "This is a nice camping spot," he said quietly. He knew. She knew he knew. Neither of them said it. The first night ended with Elena watching the parking lot lights flicker and thinking, "One night, just one night. We'll figure it out tomorrow." The second night was colder. Elena drove to the same lot. Same routine. Same bright voice. Same story about the bear in the woods. This time the bear was teaching the squirrels how to bake a cake, and it was a disaster. And Sienna laughed so hard she hiccuped. But deep in the night, Kai woke up crying. Not the kind of crying that meant he wanted attention, but the kind that meant he was cold. Deep cold, the kind that settles into small bones faster than adult ones. Elena took off her jacket, her only jacket, a thin navy puffer she'd bought secondhand years earlier. She wrapped it around Kai, tucking it under and around him until he looked like a small blue cocoon. He stopped crying. His breathing slowed. He pressed his face into the fabric and found sleep again. Elena sat in the driver's seat in her scrub top, no jacket, no blanket. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered until her jaw ached. She did not take the jacket back. She sat there, teeth clenched, arms locked around her own body, until the sky turned gray and the birds started up, and another night was behind them. "Mom, when are we going home?" Sienna asked the next morning, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Soon, baby. We're on an adventure." The words came out steady, practiced, airtight. The third night broke something. Elena had parked in the same lot again, same spot, same routine. The children were asleep by late evening. She was just beginning to let her eyes close when a sharp knock hit the driver's side window. She jumped. Her hand flew to the gear shift instinctively, fight or flight, except there was nowhere to fly. A security guard stood outside, flashlight angled low. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here. Store policy. I'm going to need you to move along." Elena's heart hammered. She glanced at the back seat. Kai stirred but didn't wake. Sienna shifted under the blanket. "Please," she said quietly. "My kids are sleeping. We're not bothering anyone. We'll be gone first thing in the morning." The guard looked at the back seat. Something flickered across his face. Maybe sympathy, maybe discomfort, maybe both. But the answer was the same. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't make the rules. You need to move." Elena started the engine. She pulled out of the lot slowly, carefully, the way you drive when your entire life is in the car and any sudden movement might wake it. She drove through Memphis late at night, past closed gas stations and empty intersections and buildings that had given up on being anything a long time ago. She found a church parking lot on a quiet avenue, small, dark. A sign out front read, "All are welcome." She hoped that included people with nowhere else to go. She parked, turned off the engine, checked the mirrors, checked the locks, checked her children. A small voice from the passenger seat. "Mom?" Malik was awake. Of course he was. He'd been awake the entire time, watching her navigate the dark, watching her get told to leave, watching her find somewhere new, watching without saying a word. "It's okay, Mom, I'm not scared." 5 words. A 10-year-old boy in a parking lot late at night telling his mother not to worry about him. That sentence hit Elena harder than losing the apartment, harder than Jalen leaving, harder than the security guard's flashlight and the cold and the empty bank account combined, because he shouldn't have to say that. A child his age should not have to reassure his mother that he's not afraid of sleeping in a car. That sentence was proof that her children knew more than she wanted them to know, that the camping story had cracks in it, that Malik was carrying weight that didn't belong to him. Elena reached across and put her hand on his head. She didn't say anything. She just held it there, her palm against his braids, until his breathing slowed and he finally, reluctantly, fell asleep. Several nights in a row. Several nights in a car with 3 children and no plan and no one to call. She was still showing up to work every morning, still rubbing lavender lotion into old hands, still smiling before things started breaking. Elena dropped the children at the public library on a main avenue early each morning. It was the only place she could think of that was free, warm, and open all day. She gave Malik the backpack with snacks, juice boxes, and baby wipes. She gave him her phone number written on a piece of paper, even though he had it memorized, because holding something concrete felt safer than trusting memory when you're 10 years old and responsible for 2 younger siblings. "You're in charge, baby," she said, kneeling to his level. "Keep them in the children's section. Don't leave the building. I'll be back by evening." Malik nodded. No argument, no complaint. He took Sienna's hand in one of his and Kai's hand in the other and walked inside like someone walking into a job he didn't apply for but couldn't afford to quit. Elena drove to Riverside Senior Care and worked a full shift, changed sheets, cleaned wounds, spooned food into mouths that couldn't chew without help, held the hand of an elderly woman who called her baby and told her she had kind eyes. Each evening she walked into the library and found them exactly where she'd left them. Sienna asleep on a chair, her head resting on a picture book. Kai in Malik's lap clutching an empty sippy cup, his diaper heavy and unchanged because Malik didn't have supplies and didn't want to ask a stranger. Malik looked up at his mother with eyes that were too old for his face. "We're fine, Mom. He ate all his crackers. She finished her book." "Fine," the word children use when they've learned that the truth is something adults can't handle. Elena picked up Kai, changed him in the library bathroom, heated a bottle of milk in the microwave at the back of the library cafe, fed him, cleaned Sienna's face with a baby wipe, carried them both to the car. She sat in the driver's seat, looked at the gas gauge, low, looked at her phone, checking account balance dwindling, looked at the rear-view mirror. 3 children settling into position for another night in the old Civic. The system was holding, barely, but the threads were showing. One of those nights, the system snapped. She had almost nothing left until payday. She pulled into a gas station and sat there for several minutes staring at the pump, doing math that had no good answer. A little gas would get her to work and back for a couple of days. Milk and diapers would keep Kai fed and clean for longer. She could not buy both. There was no version of this equation where everyone got what they needed. She bought the milk. Late that night, the car died 2 blocks from the church parking lot. Just stopped. The engine coughed once and went quiet, like it had been holding on as long as it could, and finally decided it was done. Elena sat in the dark, hands on the wheel, engine silent, 3 children asleep behind her. She got out, walked to the back, put her hands against the trunk, and started pushing. A Honda Civic weighs thousands of pounds. Elena weighed far less. She pushed anyway, 1 foot in front of the other, palms flat against cold metal, breath coming out in white clouds, arms shaking, legs burning, teeth clenched against the kind of exhaustion that lives deeper than muscles. She heard the passenger door open, footsteps on asphalt, then small hands pressed against the trunk beside hers. Malik, around 10 years old, standing beside his mother late at night, pushing a car that weighed many times what he did. Neither of them spoke. They pushed together in silence until they reached the church lot. Elena put the car in park. Malik climbed back inside. Neither of them acknowledged what had just happened. Some things don't need words. Some things are too heavy for them. The final night before everything changed, Elena sat in the car while her children slept and made 3 phone calls. The first was to a family shelter on a main avenue, full, waitlist months long. They took her name and told her someone would call. The second was to another shelter, full, longer waitlist. They gave her a hotline number and wished her luck. The third was to a youth shelter, full. They asked if she had a safe place to sleep that night. She said yes, because saying no might mean someone would call child services, and losing her children was the one outcome she would not survive. She hung up. She sat in the dark. She dialed one more number, her older sister Lydia. The last thread. Lydia answered on the 4th ring, voice heavy with sleep. "Hey, Tam, what's going on?" Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out at first. Then, quietly, like a confession she'd been holding inside for several nights, she said, "Lyd, I need help. We don't have anywhere to go. I've been sleeping in the car with the kids." Silence on the other end. A long, terrible silence. "Elena?" Lydia said, and her voice cracked in a way that told Elena everything before the words arrived. "I can't take 4 more people. I'm barely making it myself. The apartment is 1 bedroom. I'm already behind on rent. I want to help you. I just don't have the room." It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't indifference. It was a woman drowning, telling another woman drowning that she couldn't pull her out without going under herself. Elena said she understood. She said it was okay. She said she'd figure something out. She hung up. The car was silent except for Kai's slow breathing and the occasional rustle of Sienna turning under the blanket and the distant hum of a city that didn't know she existed. For the first time in several nights, Elena cried, but not out loud. She couldn't cry out loud. If she made a sound, Malik would wake up. And if Malik woke up, he'd see her. And if he saw her, he'd know that the camping trip was over, the adventure was a lie, and his mother didn't have a plan. So she cried the only way she could, through her breathing. Long, slow, controlled breaths, each one carrying the weight of everything she'd been holding, her chest shaking, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her jaw locked tight. She cried in silence for what felt like forever, then stopped, wiped her face with the back of her hand, checked the mirrors, checked the locks, checked her children. Still sleeping, still safe, still believing in a camping trip that never existed. The final night ended. Hours later, someone would knock on her window. But Elena didn't know that yet. She only knew what she'd known for several nights, that she was alone, that the system had no room for her, and that tomorrow she'd wake up, wash her scrubs in a public restroom sink, dry them under a hand dryer, put on her name tag, and show up at Riverside Senior Care early in the morning to take care of other people's families. Because that's what Elena Voss did. She showed up even when no one showed up for her. Hundreds of miles away, in a penthouse high above downtown Atlanta, a man named Damon Vale sat in an office that most people would call beautiful and felt absolutely nothing. He was in his early 50s, CEO of Vale Capital Group, a real estate investment firm valued at billions. He owned commercial properties in many states, affordable housing developments in several cities, and hotels that travel magazines described with words like exclusive and visionary. His face had appeared on major business covers. His name appeared in financial publications regularly. His signature on a contract could rearrange the skyline of an American city, and none of it had meant anything to him in years. Damon grew up on the south side of Chicago in a modest apartment that smelled like palm oil and bleach and the particular exhaustion of a woman working 2 jobs to keep 1 child alive. His mother, Maeve Ellis, worked nights as a nurse's aide at a major hospital and days cleaning office buildings downtown. She left before Damon woke and came home after he was supposed to be asleep. He heard her in the kitchen late at night, shoes off, feet swollen, eating standing up because sitting down meant she might not get back up. His father died when Damon was a boy. Heart attack on a construction site. No life insurance, no savings. Just a funeral Maeve paid for with money she didn't have. And a boy who stopped being a child the moment he understood. Damon remembered one night with absolute clarity. He was around 11. Maeve picked him up from school in their old car. She didn't drive home. She drove to the parking lot behind a grocery store. She turned off the engine. She looked at him. "We're going to sleep here tonight, baby. Just tonight." That night lasted 3 weeks. 21 nights in a car that smelled like vinyl and cold air, and his mother's perfume mixed with hospital disinfectant. Maeve drove him to school every morning and told him not to tell anyone. She washed his uniform in the bathroom at the gas station. She braided his hair in the front seat using a comb she kept in the glove box. She never once cried in front of him, but he heard her late at night when she thought he was asleep. Small sounds, muffled, controlled, the sound of a woman trying to hold the world together with 2 hands and failing only in the dark where no one could see. Damon never forgot that sound. He built his entire career on top of it. Every dollar he earned, every building he bought, every deal he closed was laid over that memory like concrete over a crack. Cover it, build on it, never go back. He had succeeded. By every measure that mattered to the world, he had succeeded beyond anything Maeve could have imagined when she was reheating food late at night in that small apartment. He'd pulled himself out. He'd pulled his mother out. He'd put her in a comfortable house with a garden and every comfort a woman in her later years could want. But years ago, the thing he'd built cracked. His daughter, Lila, in her late 20s, a registered nurse at a major hospital in Atlanta. Bright, stubborn, relentless. She had her grandmother's eyes, and her grandmother's hands, and her grandmother's absolute refusal to walk past suffering without stopping. Lila volunteered at shelters. She spent her weekends reading to children, helping mothers fill out housing applications, braiding little girls' hair the way Maeve used to braid Damon's in the front seat of that old car. She told Damon once, sitting across from him in his office with her feet up on his expensive desk, "Dad, you know what I love about nursing? You get to hold someone's hand on their worst day, not fix it, just hold it." She died on an ordinary weekday. A car accident on the interstate. A truck driver fell asleep. It was that simple. It was that permanent. Damon built 2 homeless shelters in her name, signed the checks, approved the designs, attended the ribbon cuttings, shook hands, smiled for cameras. He never once stepped inside either building because every woman in those shelters would look like Lila. Every child would sound like Lila. Every pair of hands holding a stranger's hand on their worst day would remind him of the daughter he couldn't hold on hers. So he helped from a distance, through systems, through foundations, through accountants and program directors and quarterly reports. He moved money towards suffering without ever having to look at it directly. It was easier that way. Cleaner, safer. His driver, Howard Klein, was the only person who saw through it. Howard was in his early 60s, former Marine, many years behind the wheel of Damon's car. He'd served tours overseas, come home to a country that didn't have a place for him, and spent months sleeping in a van behind a gas station before Damon hired him on a recommendation from a veterans coordinator. Howard didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He had the kind of presence that made conversation optional. When he did speak, it landed. No filler, no performance, just the blunt, unhurried truth of a man who'd already lost everything once and discovered the world didn't end. He was the only person who ever called Damon by his first name without being invited to. The only one who'd look him in the eye and say what no board member or financial advisor would dare to say. Howard watched Damon avoid those shelters for years, watched him sign checks and skip visits, watched him build something in his daughter's name and then refuse to stand inside it. He never said a word about it, not once. He was waiting. For what exactly, he couldn't have told you. But he'd know it when he saw it. The Memphis trip was supposed to be routine. Damon flew in one evening to inspect a mixed-use development his company was building on the edge of the medical district, affordable housing units above a ground-floor grocery store. The kind of project that looked good in annual reports and made investors feel like they were doing something meaningful while still turning a profit. Damon had approved the blueprints months earlier. He hadn't visited the site once. Howard picked him up at the airport in the black SUV and drove toward downtown. Damon sat in the back answering emails, not looking out the window. Memphis rolled past him unnoticed. The barbecue joints, the boarded-up storefronts, the church parking lots. He saw none of it. They finished the site visit by evening. Damon wanted to go straight to the hotel. Howard took a different route. "I need gas," he said, turning onto a quiet avenue. Damon didn't look up from his phone. "Fine." Howard pulled into a gas station 2 blocks from a small church with a sign out front that read, "All are welcome." He got out, swiped a card, started the pump, then stood there, not pumping, not moving, just looking at something across the street. An old Honda Civic sat in the church parking lot. Rust along the wheel wells, cracked windshield. The windows were fogged from the inside, condensation on every pane. The kind of fog that only forms when people have been breathing inside a closed car for hours. Howard had seen that fog before. He'd made that fog himself. Months in a van behind a gas station, breathing against cold glass every night until the windows looked like milk. He knew what he was looking at. He crossed the street slowly, not rushing, the way you approach something fragile. The parking lot was dark except for a single floodlight on the church wall that cast everything in pale yellow. He could see shapes through the fog, small shapes, children. And in the driver's seat, a figure sitting upright, arms crossed over her chest, not moving. Howard stopped beside the driver's side window. He stood there for a moment, close enough to hear the faint hum of breathing inside. Then he raised his hand and knocked, gently. 2 knocks. The way you knock on a door, you're not sure you should be opening. The figure in the driver's seat flinched hard. Her hand shot to the gear shift, her body twisted toward the back seat, instinctively placing herself between the window and the shapes behind her. Howard stepped back. 1 full step. He raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. He held them there, visible, unthreatening, the posture of a man who understood that a woman sleeping in a car with children had every reason to be afraid of anyone who came to her window in the dark. Through the fog, Elena's face appeared. She wiped a small circle on the glass with her sleeve and looked out. Her eyes were red but dry, exhausted but alert. The eyes of someone who hadn't truly slept in several nights. Howard didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't try to look friendly. He just stood there with his hands up and waited for her to decide whether to crack the window or start the engine. She cracked the window an inch. "I'm not bothering anyone," she said immediately. Her voice was rough, automatic, the same sentence she'd said to the store security guard nights earlier. "We'll be gone in the morning." Howard didn't move. "How long?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not soft, not gentle. Quiet. The voice of a man who was asking a question he already knew the answer to. Elena's jaw tightened. "We're fine." "I didn't ask if you're fine, I asked how long." Silence. The car's engine ticked in the cold. Somewhere behind Elena, one of the children stirred. A small sound, the sound of a body shifting under a thin blanket. "Several nights?" Elena said. Howard looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved to the back seat. He couldn't see clearly through the fog, but he could count. 3 shapes, small, one of them very small. He nodded once, then he turned around and walked back across the street. Elena watched him go. She expected that. People looked, people asked, people walked away. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. Howard walked to the SUV. He opened the rear passenger door. Damon was still looking at his phone, the screen casting blue light across his face. Howard leaned in. His voice was steady. "There's a woman in that car with 3 kids. She's wearing nurse scrubs. She's been out here several nights." Damon's thumb stopped scrolling. He didn't look up immediately. His hand just froze, hovering over the screen the way a body freezes when it hears something it wasn't ready for. Howard waited. Damon looked up. His face was unreadable, the face of a man who'd spent decades learning how to keep his reactions behind glass. "What do you want me to do about it?" The question wasn't cold. It wasn't dismissive. It was the question of a man who'd been avoiding exactly this moment for years and knew it. Howard didn't blink. "I don't want you to do anything. I'm telling you what's there." He closed the door, walked back to the pump, finished fueling, got in the driver's seat, and started the engine. The SUV sat in the gas station lot, engine running, heat blowing, Damon in the back seat. The old Civic 50 yards away, fogged windows, 3 children, a woman in scrubs who'd been sleeping upright for several nights. Damon stared at the Civic through the tinted glass. His chest felt tight. Not the tightness of a heart attack or anxiety, but the tightness of something pressing against a wall he'd built a long time ago, pressing slowly, steadily, the way water presses against a dam before the first crack appears. He thought about his mother, Maeve, in that old car, the grocery store parking lot. "We're going to sleep here tonight, baby. Just tonight." He thought about Lila, scrubs, shelter, holding someone's hand on their worst day. "Dad, you don't have to fix it. You just have to show up." He thought about 2 shelters with his daughter's name on the front that he'd never stepped inside. 2 buildings he'd paid for and run from. 2 attempts to honor her memory without actually doing the one thing she would have wanted him to do. Look at it. Stand in front of it. Don't turn away. Damon opened his door. The night air hit him immediately. Cold, damp. Memphis in late winter, the kind of cold that doesn't bite so much as settle, getting into your clothes and staying there. His shoes, handmade Italian leather, touched asphalt that was cracked and oil-stained. Nothing like the polished floors he walked on every day. He crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the cold, but because of what was on the other side. Howard watched from the SUV. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. He'd done his part. He'd pointed. The rest was Damon's. Damon reached the old Civic. He stood where Howard had stood. He looked at the fogged windows. He could hear breathing inside, small breaths, the breathing of children who'd learned to sleep in small spaces. He raised his hand, then stopped. His daughter's voice, clear as a phone call. "Dad, you just have to show up." He knocked. Elena's face appeared at the window again. She'd barely settled back down from Howard's visit. Now someone else. Her expression shifted from fear to confusion to the particular kind of weariness that comes from being disappointed so many times that hope itself becomes suspicious. She cracked the window again, same inch. Damon looked at her. She looked at him. 2 strangers in a church parking lot late at night, separated by an inch of open window and everything else. Damon didn't introduce himself as a CEO. He didn't mention his company. He didn't reach for his wallet. He said the only thing that came to his mind, the only thing that felt true enough to say to a woman he didn't know who was sleeping in a car with 3 children. "My mother was a nurse's aide, too. She worked nights at a big hospital in Chicago. She raised me alone after my father died. There was a stretch when I was around 11 where we slept in her car for 3 weeks, a parking lot behind a grocery store. She told me it was just for one night." He paused. The memory moved through him like cold water. It wasn't one night. Elena stared at him. Her hand, which had been gripping the window crank, loosened slightly. Not trust, not yet, but the absence of immediate fear, which was as close to trust as a woman in her position could get. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I heard you've been out here several nights," Damon said. "And I know what the next night feels like when there's no plan for the one after." Elena's throat moved. She didn't speak. Damon reached into his coat. Not for a wallet, for a business card. Thick paper, raised letters, a phone number. He held it at the edge of the open window. "There's a hotel room booked for tonight. It's already paid for. Your name is at the front desk. Take your children somewhere warm. Sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow morning, if you want, we can talk about what happens next. If you don't want to, throw this card away and I'll never come back. Your choice. No conditions, no strings." Elena looked at the card, then at him, then at the back seat where 3 children were curled together under a blanket that wasn't thick enough for a Memphis winter. "How do I know this isn't a trick?" she said. Her voice wasn't hostile, it was tired. The question of a woman who had learned that people who offered help usually wanted something. "You don't," Damon said. "I'm a stranger. You have every reason not to trust me. All I can tell you is that my mother slept in a car with me years ago, and nobody knocked on her window. I'm knocking on yours." Silence, a long one. Elena's eyes moved between the card and the back seat, and the man standing in the dark outside her window. Then, Kai coughed. Not a big cough, a small one. The wet, rattling cough of a 3-year-old whose lungs had been breathing cold air for too long. The kind of cough that starts small and doesn't stay small. Elena's hand moved. She took the card. Her fingers were cold and rough and trembling, and when they brushed against Damon's hand, he felt the chill in them, like an accusation against every warm building he'd ever owned. "My kids come first," she said. It wasn't a statement to Damon. It was a statement to herself. A compass reading. A reminder of the only principle that hadn't bent in several nights of breaking. They always come first. "I know," Damon said. He stepped back. Elena looked at the card one more time. Then, she started the engine. It caught on the 3rd try. She pulled out of the church parking lot slowly, the way she always drove, carefully, protectively, like the car was made of glass and everything inside it was irreplaceable. Damon stood in the empty lot and watched the taillights disappear down the avenue. The cold pressed against him. His hands were shaking, not from the temperature. Howard pulled the SUV alongside him. Damon got in. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Howard said quietly, without looking in the mirror, "Lila would have knocked first." Damon closed his eyes. Yeah, she would have. They drove to the hotel in silence. The hotel on Union Avenue was clean and ordinary, with a lobby that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner, and the particular neutrality of a place designed to feel like nowhere in particular. Elena pulled into the parking lot late that night. She sat in the car for several minutes before turning off the engine. She looked at the card again. She looked at the hotel. She looked at her children asleep in the back, unaware that anything had changed. Then she got out. She lifted Kai first, his body warm and limp against her shoulder, his cough quiet for now. She woke Sienna, who stumbled out half asleep, clutching the fleece blanket. Malik got out last. He stood beside the car and looked at the hotel the way a person looks at something they're not sure is real. "Mom, where are we?" Elena swallowed. "A new camping spot, baby, a really nice one." Malik looked at her. He didn't believe her, but he picked up the backpack and followed her inside because that's what Malik did. He followed his mother even when the map didn't make sense. The woman at the front desk found the reservation immediately. "Voss, 2 queen beds, prepaid." She handed Elena 2 key cards and pointed toward the elevator with a smile that was polite and professional and had no idea what those key cards meant to the woman receiving them. The room was on an upper floor. Elena opened the door and stood in the doorway. 2 beds, white sheets, pillows that weren't backpacks, a heater humming warm air through a vent, a bathroom with a door that closed, a bathtub, soap, towels, light that came from a lamp instead of a street light. Sienna walked in first. She touched the bed like it might disappear. Then she saw the bathroom. "Mama, there's soap, like real soap, not the gas station kind." She said it with the wonder of a child discovering something extraordinary, because for a 7-year-old who'd been washing her face with baby wipes for several nights, a bar of hotel soap was extraordinary. Kai squirmed out of Elena's arms and crawled onto the nearest bed. He sank into the mattress. His body relaxed in a way Elena hadn't seen in almost a week, every muscle letting go at once. He was asleep in seconds. The fastest he'd fallen asleep since the apartment, because for the first time in several nights, the surface beneath him wasn't a car seat covered with a thin blanket. It was a bed, a real bed, the kind of thing most people never think about because they've never had to. Malik walked in last. He set his backpack on the floor. He looked at the room, the beds, the lamp, the curtains, the heater. Then he sat down on the floor, back against the bed, knees up, and he cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears running down his face in 2 quiet lines while his shoulders shook and his hands gripped his knees, and several nights of being brave finally found somewhere safe enough to end. Elena sat down beside him. She didn't say it was okay. She didn't say don't cry. She didn't say anything. She put her arm around him and pulled him close and held him the way she'd wanted to hold him for several nights but couldn't. Because holding him meant admitting they needed holding, and admitting that meant the camping trip was over. The camping trip was over. They sat together on the floor of that hotel room while Sienna explored the bathroom and Kai slept on a real mattress, and the heater pushed warm air into every corner of a room that felt, for the first time in several nights, like the world had walls. Outside in the SUV parked in the hotel lot, Howard called Damon. "The kids are inside. They're warm." Damon sat in his own hotel room blocks away, phone pressed to his ear. "Good," he said. He hung up. He sat on the edge of his bed, a room with sheets the thread count advertisements were written about, in a hotel he partially owned, and for the first time in years, Damon Vale cried. Not the controlled private grief he'd learned to manage, the other kind. The kind that starts in your stomach and rises through your chest and comes out as a sound you don't recognize as your own. He wasn't crying for Elena. He wasn't crying for her children. He was crying for Lila. For the daughter who would have been the first person to cross that street and knock on that window. For years of building shelters he couldn't enter and signing checks that kept his hands clean and his heart untouched. For the distance he'd put between himself and every person who reminded him of what he'd lost. Lila's voice, clear, steady, the way she always sounded when she was telling him something he didn't want to hear. "Dad, you don't have to fix it. You just have to show up." He'd shown up that night, for the first time in years, and it had broken him open in exactly the way he'd been afraid it would. But broken open, he was starting to realize, was not the same as broken. Damon arrived at the hotel the next morning. He carried 2 cups of coffee and a bag from a bakery on a nearby street. Muffins, croissants, a chocolate chip cookie the size of a child's face that he'd picked specifically because he imagined a 7-year-old would find it extraordinary. He was right. Sienna held the cookie with both hands and looked at it like it contained the secrets of the universe. Elena opened the door wearing the same scrubs from the night before. She'd washed them in the hotel bathroom sink and dried them over the heater vent. They were wrinkled but clean. Her face was different, not transformed, not glowing, just straighter. The posture of a person who'd slept horizontally for the first time in a week. Small difference, enormous distance. She took the coffee with both hands, held it close, inhaled the steam the way a person inhales a memory they thought they'd lost. "Real coffee," she said quietly. "From an actual place. I forgot what that smelled like." They sat at the small table by the window while Kai played with the TV remote, and Sienna ate her cookie in methodical bites, saving the chocolate chips for last. Malik sat on the bed watching Damon with steady, evaluating eyes. Not hostile, not afraid, just watching the way he always watched, measuring. Damon didn't start with a plan. He started with a question. "Tell me what happened." Elena set down her coffee. She looked at him for a moment, deciding how much to give a stranger. Then she decided that a man who told her about his mother sleeping in a car in a grocery store parking lot years ago had already given her something. And maybe she owed him the same honesty back. She told him everything. The landlord selling the building, the notice, the math that didn't work, the modest wage, the thousands needed to move, the few hundred in the bank, the store parking lot, the security guard, the church, the library, the milk or gas decision, pushing the car late at night, the shelters that were full, the sister who couldn't help. She told it all without self-pity, without performance, just facts laid out in order, the way a nurse charts a patient's decline. Clinical, clear, exhausted. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, looking down at her coffee. "It's not being without a home. It's that I did everything right. I went to work, I paid my bills, I raised my kids, I didn't do drugs, I didn't make bad decisions. I just didn't make enough money, and somehow that's enough to end up in a car." She paused. "You start thinking it's your fault. That you missed something, that if you'd been smarter or worked harder or saved more, this wouldn't have happened. And you know that's not true, but knowing and feeling are 2 different things." Damon looked at her. He didn't say, "I understand." He didn't say, "It's not your fault." Those were things people said to make themselves feel better about someone else's pain. Instead, he said, "My mother said the exact same thing. almost word for word. She told me once, years later, that the hardest part of sleeping in that car wasn't the cold, it was believing she deserved it. Elena met his eyes. For the first time, something passed between them that wasn't gratitude or charity or the awkward distance between someone who has and someone who doesn't. It was recognition. The specific, quiet recognition of two people who'd lived in the same room, just decades apart. Damon set down his coffee. I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that? Elena nodded. I'm not offering you money. I'm not offering you a handout. I'm not trying to save you. You don't need saving. You need a foundation, something solid to stand on so you can start building again. Here's what I can offer. For 3 months, an apartment in one of the affordable housing units my company manages here in Memphis. Subsidized, not free. Childcare through a program we partner with, so you don't have to leave your children in a library. And time. Time to get your practical nursing certification. You're a nursing assistant making a modest wage. Licensed practical nurses in Memphis start around $25 an hour with benefits. There are accelerated programs, 12 weeks. You're already halfway qualified. You just need the space to finish. He paused. I'm not giving you a new life, Elena. I'm giving you 3 months to build one. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Elena stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Why? She said. Out of all the people in this city sleeping in cars right now, why me? Damon looked at Malik sitting on the bed, still watching, still measuring. He looked at Sienna with chocolate on her fingers, drawing something on the hotel notepad. He looked at Kai pressing every button on the remote with the dedication of a scientist conducting critical research. Because my mother was you, he said. Years ago. Same job, same car, same math that didn't work, and nobody came for her. Nobody knocked on her window. She got out on her own, but it took years. Years she didn't have to waste. Years my childhood didn't have to lose. He paused. And because my daughter would have been the first person across that street last night, she would have knocked before Howard did. She would have sat right where I'm sitting and said exactly what I'm saying. And she's not here to do it, so I'm doing it for her. Elena looked down at her coffee. Tears ran down her face and dripped onto the table, and she didn't wipe them away. Not because she'd stopped caring, but because for the first time in several nights, she was in a room where crying was allowed. My kids come first, she said, her voice breaking. Whatever this is, whatever happens, they come first. They always come first. I know, Damon said. That's exactly why I'm here. The apartment was on the second floor of a building called Parkway Commons. 2 bedrooms, laminate floors, small windows, a kitchen with a stove that worked and a refrigerator that hummed and cabinets that were empty but waiting. It wasn't beautiful. The carpet was builder grade. The countertops were laminate. The light fixtures were the kind that come standard in every affordable unit in every city. But it had a lock on the front door. It had heat that came through vents in the ceiling. It had walls that didn't move. Elena carried Kai in first. He was asleep on her shoulder, his face pressed against her neck, his breathing slow and even. Sienna walked in behind her, spinning in the middle of the living room, arms out, testing how much space there was. This is ours? All of it? All of it? Elena nodded. Sienna ran to the kitchen, opened every cabinet, counted the drawers, turned the faucet on and off 3 times just to watch the water come out. Mama, the water works. She said it like she was reporting a miracle. Malik stood at the door to the smaller bedroom. He didn't go in right away. He stood there, one hand on the frame, looking at the empty room, a window, a closet, carpet, nothing else. But it was his. This is mine? He asked, turning to Elena. Yours. He didn't say anything else. He walked inside. He touched the wall with his palm flat, like he was checking if it was real. Then he closed the door, gently, not a slam, a careful, deliberate close. The sound of a boy choosing privacy for the first time in his life. Elena heard crying through the door, small, quiet, the way Malik always cried. She put her hand on the doorknob, then took it off. She stepped back. She let him have the one thing he'd never had, a room where he could feel something without anyone watching. She stood in the hallway, hand over her mouth, tears running down her face, and let her son cry alone for the first time. Because he deserved a door that closed, because children his age shouldn't have to be brave every single second of every single day. The next morning, Elena enrolled in the Practical Nursing Accelerated program at a local community college. Classes 3 evenings a week, clinical rotations on weekends, 12 weeks total. She still worked her nursing assistant shift at Riverside from early morning to mid-afternoon. She still came home, made dinner, helped Sienna with homework, bathed Kai, read stories, tucked them in. Then she studied, at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that got cold, while she memorized medication dosages and practiced charting and learned the things that separated a modest wage from a living one, with benefits. Howard drove the children to school and daycare every morning. Damon had arranged it without being asked. Howard pulled up in the SUV at the usual time, helped Kai into his car seat, waited while Sienna buckled herself in, nodded at Malik. They rode in comfortable silence. Howard didn't ask questions. The children didn't explain. It was a routine that built itself in the space between need and dignity. Elena was exhausted, but it was a different kind of exhaustion now, the kind that comes from building something instead of surviving something, the kind that has a direction. She fell asleep at the kitchen table twice in the first week, forehead on her textbook, pen still in her hand. Both times she woke up with a blanket over her shoulders that she hadn't put there. Malik. Of course it was Malik. Damon visited once that first month. He brought a picture book about oceans for Sienna, a set of building blocks for Kai, a gift card for the bookstore on Union Avenue for Malik, because Malik was the kind of kid who'd rather pick his own book than be handed one. Sienna showed Damon around the apartment like a real estate agent conducting a tour. This is the kitchen. This is where Mama studies. This is my room. I share with Kai, but that's okay because he's small. Then, she handed Damon a piece of paper, a drawing. 4 figures standing in front of a house, a woman in blue scrubs, a tall boy, a smaller girl with butterflies in her hair, a baby, and next to them, a tall man in a suit drawn slightly apart, but clearly part of the group. Sienna had written at the top in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "My family and Mr. Damon." Damon looked at the drawing. He smiled. He said, "Thank you." He folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. Then he walked to the SUV, sat in the back seat, and didn't move for several minutes. Howard sat in the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't look in the mirror. He just sat, because Howard knew. The drawing had 4 figures and 1 tall man. Lila would have been the 5th. Lila would have been the one kneeling beside Sienna, adding more butterflies. Damon pressed the drawing flat against his knee with both hands, smoothed the creases, and stared at it until the faces blurred. Some gifts break you from the inside. A 7-year-old girl, who'd been sleeping in a car weeks earlier, had just drawn a family portrait that included a man she'd met twice. She'd given him something no amount of money could buy, a place in a picture, a belonging. And the empty space where Lila should have stood burned like a wound that had never been allowed to scar. Several weeks into the program, Elena was halfway through, scores in the top tier, clinical evaluations excellent. Her instructor told her she had the hands of someone who'd been doing this work for years. She had. She'd been doing it for years. She just hadn't been paid for the skill level she actually operated at. She came home one evening and found a woman sitting on the hallway floor outside an apartment 1 floor below hers. The woman was young, maybe late 20s. She had 2 children with her, a boy around 4 sitting quietly beside her, holding a stuffed bear with 1 arm missing, and a baby girl maybe 8 months old sleeping in a car seat on the hallway floor. The woman's eyes were red. She wasn't crying anymore. She'd already finished. Her face had the look Elena recognized instantly. The look of someone who'd run out of options and was sitting in the first place that felt like it had walls. Elena knelt down. "Hey, you okay?" The woman looked up, startled, guarded, the same way Elena had looked at Howard through a fogged window weeks earlier. "We're fine," the woman said. Elena almost smiled. Almost, because she knew exactly what that word meant when spoken by a woman on a hallway floor with 2 children and nowhere to go. "I didn't ask if you're fine," Elena said gently. "What's your name?" Kendra Williams. Elena sat down on the floor beside her, right there in the hallway, back against the wall. Two women who didn't know each other sitting on cheap carpet in a building that was supposed to house people who had nowhere else. I'm Elena, I live upstairs. How long have you been here? Kendra's jaw tightened. Since this morning. We got evicted last week. I've been staying at the waiting room at the medical center. They let you sit in the chairs overnight if you don't cause trouble. Elena looked at the boy with the one-armed bear. Then, at the baby sleeping in the car seat. Then, at Kendra, whose hands were shaking the way hands shake when they've been gripping something invisible for too long. Have you eaten? Kendra hesitated. That hesitation said everything. That night, Elena cooked rice and beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy. The food of people who know how to make a dollar stretch across several plates. She carried it downstairs in a pot with a towel wrapped around the handle. Kendra ate slowly, like someone who'd forgotten that food could be warm. Her son ate fast, the way children eat when they're not sure when the next meal is coming. The baby slept through it. Over the next couple of weeks, Elena did what no one expected. She split her food assistance. Not evenly, she couldn't afford evenly, but she cooked extra portions several nights a week and brought them down. She called Howard and asked, carefully and respectfully, if there was room in the daycare arrangement for 2 more children. Howard didn't ask Damon first. He made the call himself. And on the only night Elena didn't work and didn't study, she sat with Kendra at the kitchen table and helped her fill out housing assistance applications, form after form, emergency housing, Section 8, rapid rehousing. The same forms Elena had filled out weeks earlier. The same system that had told her waitlist, waitlist, waitlist. But this time Kendra had someone sitting beside her, pointing at the right boxes, explaining the language, translating bureaucracy into something a young mother could actually navigate. Damon found out through Howard, not because Howard reported it, but because Damon asked how Elena was doing, and Howard told the truth. She's feeding another family, splitting what she's got, spending her one night off filling out paperwork for a woman she met in the hallway a couple of weeks ago. Damon drove to Memphis the following weekend. He sat across from Elena in her kitchen, while Kai napped and Sienna colored at the table and Malik read in his room with the door closed. You barely have enough for yourself, Damon said. Why are you giving to someone else? Elena looked at him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about it. The answer came out the way truth does when it's been living inside you so long it doesn't need rehearsal. Because several weeks ago, I was her, and somebody knocked on my window. I can't walk past her window and pretend I don't hear the same sound. Damon sat with that. He sat with it for a long time. Elena continued, You want to know the difference between charity and what Howard did that night? Charity is giving something you won't miss. Howard gave me something that cost him nothing but meant everything. He gave me the knowledge that someone saw me, that I wasn't invisible, that a stranger could look at a fogged-up window and care enough to knock. She paused. Kendra's kids are the same as mine. They're not different. They're not less. They're just stuck in the same system I was stuck in, and the only thing standing between them and a floor to sleep on is someone who remembers what it felt like to not have one. Damon looked at Sienna's drawing still pinned to the refrigerator, 4 figures and a tall man. He looked at the pot on the stove with tomorrow's leftovers already portioned into containers, 2 for upstairs, 2 for downstairs. He looked at Elena Voss, in her mid-30s, nursing assistant making a modest wage, halfway through practical nursing training, raising 3 children alone and feeding a stranger's family with food she couldn't spare. Because someone had knocked on her window and she had decided that kindness wasn't something you received and kept. It was something you received and passed on. 2 days after that conversation, Damon flew back to Atlanta. He didn't go to his office. He didn't go to his penthouse. He told Howard to take him to the Lila Vale family shelter. Howard pulled up to the curb. He didn't turn off the engine. He looked in the mirror. You want me to come with you? No, Damon said. He stared at the building through the window. The sign above the door. His daughter's name in gold letters on a blue background. Years old, that sign. He'd approved the font. He'd approved the color. He'd approved everything from the outside. He'd never seen it from the inside. He got out. Howard stayed. The front door was glass with a security buzzer. Damon pressed it. A woman's voice came through the speaker, warm and tired. Can I help you? My name is Damon Vale. I'd like to come in. A pause, then the door buzzed open. The lobby smelled like floor cleaner and cooked food, and the particular warmth of a building that runs all day because the people inside it have been cold for too long. A front desk with a sign-in sheet. A hallway with rooms on either side. A common area at the end with couches and a television and a bookshelf and a rug with cartoon animals worn thin from children's feet. On the wall behind the front desk was a corkboard. Volunteer photos, staff schedules, donation acknowledgments, and in the center, a framed photograph. Lila Vale. Scrubs, stethoscope around her neck, that smile. The one that made everyone who saw it feel like they'd been noticed by someone who actually cared. Below the photo, a small brass plaque. In loving memory of Lila Vale, who held hands and hearts in equal measure. Damon stood in front of that photograph. He didn't move. His hands hung at his sides. His breathing was slow and deliberate, the kind of breathing a person does when they're trying to stay inside their body instead of running out of it. The shelter director appeared beside him, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a lanyard with too many keys. "Mr. Vale, we've been hoping you'd visit." Damon didn't look away from the photograph. "I should have come sooner." She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't tell him it was okay. She just stood beside him and let the sentence exist. "Your daughter sat in that corner every week," the director said, pointing to a spot near the bookshelf. "She'd bring her own books, picture books mostly. The kids would line up. She'd read to them for an hour, sometimes two. She did the voices, animals, monsters, princesses. She did them all." Damon's chest tightened. "There was one girl," the director continued, "around 4 when Lila started volunteering. She called her Miss Sunshine. Every week she'd wait by the door starting early, even though Lila didn't arrive until evening. She just wanted to be first in line." Damon swallowed. He didn't trust his voice. "She's 7 now. She's still here. She still talks about Miss Sunshine." Damon looked at the corner, a small chair, a rug, the bookshelf. He could see her there, not as a memory, but as a presence. Lila sitting cross-legged on that rug, a picture book open on her knees, doing a voice for a grumpy bear that made a little girl laugh. He walked to the chair. He sat down. It was small, made for someone much younger or much shorter. His knees came up too high. He didn't care. He sat in his daughter's chair, in his daughter's shelter, in the corner where she'd spent her evenings doing the one thing she loved most, holding someone's hand on their worst day. He spoke to the photograph on the wall, quietly, barely above a whisper. Not for anyone else, just for her. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm sorry it took me so long." He sat in that chair for a long while. The director left him alone. The hallway hummed with the sounds of a shelter going about its evening. Dishes clattering in the kitchen, a television playing cartoons, a child's laughter from somewhere down the hall. Damon didn't cry. He'd done his crying. This wasn't grief. This was something else, something quieter and harder and more important than grief. This was arrival. Years of running, years of building walls between himself and every person who reminded him of what he'd lost. Years of signing checks and skipping visits and telling himself that distance was the same as strength. It wasn't. Distance was just distance. And strength, real strength, was sitting in a too small chair in a shelter that smelled like floor cleaner and letting yourself remember the person you loved without flinching. Lila's voice one last time, clear as a bell. "Dad, you don't have to fix it. You just have to show up." He'd shown up. He was here. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Elena passed her licensing exam on a Thursday afternoon. She was sitting in the testing center staring at the screen when the words appeared. "Congratulations. You have passed." She read it twice, then a third time. Then she closed her eyes and pressed her hands flat against the desk and breathed. 12 weeks, dozens of exams, hundreds of flashcards she'd made by hand at the kitchen table after the children were asleep. Clinical rotations where she'd worked long hours on top of her nursing assistant shifts and still come home to help Sienna with her spelling words. Nights where the textbook blurred because her eyes couldn't stay open. But she turned the page anyway, because turning the page was the only thing between a modest wage and one that could actually support a family. She walked out of the testing center into the parking lot. The sun was low. The air was warm. Memphis in early spring, the kind of evening that smells like cut grass and possibility. The old Honda Civic was parked in the third row. She'd kept it. Not because she needed it, because she needed to remember. Elena opened the driver's side door and sat down. She didn't start the engine. She just sat there, hands on the wheel, the way she'd sat for several nights in a church parking lot with 3 children breathing behind her. She looked at the back seat. The blanket was gone. The backpacks were gone. The snacks from the dollar store were gone. But the seat was the same. The crack in the windshield was the same. The smell, faintly underneath everything else, was the same. She sat there for a long time. "We made it," she said out loud. To no one, to everyone. To the woman she'd been weeks earlier, who didn't know if she could do this. To the woman she'd been on those final nights who thought the world had run out of room for her. To her grandmother who'd cleaned houses for decades and never complained. To Malik who'd pushed a car in the dark without being asked. To Sienna who'd drawn a family with butterflies and included a man she'd met twice. To Kai, who laughed at everything because he didn't know yet that the world could be cruel. We made it. The following Monday, Elena started her new position as a licensed practical nurse at Memphis Regional Medical Center, a significantly higher hourly wage. Full medical, dental, and vision benefits for herself and 3 dependents. A fixed schedule, day shift, early morning to mid-afternoon. Home before the children got back from school. For the first time in her life, Elena Voss had health insurance. For the first time, a doctor's visit for Kai's cough didn't mean choosing between medicine and groceries. For the first time, she looked at a paycheck and the number on it was larger than the number she owed. She paid rent on the apartment herself starting the 4th month. Full amount, no subsidy, no assistance. Her name on the lease, her name on the mailbox, her name on the utility bill that arrived every month like proof that she existed in a system that had once pretended she didn't. Damon called when he found out she'd declined the continued support. He wasn't surprised. He'd expected it. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "The offer stands as long as you need it." Elena's voice was steady. "You gave me 3 months. I'm giving myself the rest." Silence on the line. Not awkward. Respectful. The silence of a man recognizing that the strongest thing he could do was step back. Then Damon said quietly, "The 3 months was never about the apartment, Elena. It was about you believing you deserved a foundation to stand on." Elena looked around her kitchen. Sienna's drawings on the refrigerator, Kai's blocks scattered across the living room floor, Malik's basketball shoes by the front door muddy from practice, a pot of rice on the stove, a textbook on the counter that she no longer needed but hadn't put away yet because it reminded her of what she'd done. "I know," she said, "and I'm standing. My kids have a home, a real one with their names on the mailbox." A year later, Malik made the basketball team at his middle school. 6th grade, starting point guard. He wasn't the tallest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was the most aware. The coach said he played like someone who'd spent his whole life watching, reading people, anticipating what they'd do before they did it. The coach didn't know how right he was. The first game of the season, Elena sat in the bleachers with Kai on her lap and Sienna beside her drawing the court in her sketchbook. Malik walked out in his jersey. Number 7, blue and white. His last name printed across the back in block letters, Voss. He stopped at the edge of the court, looked down at the jersey, touched the letters with his fingertips. Then he stood still for several seconds, not nervous, not performing, just reading his own name on something official, something that belonged to him, something that said he was part of something larger than a car in a parking lot. Then he ran onto the court and played like a child who finally had room to be a child. Sienna entered the school art contest. The theme was home. She worked on her piece for a couple of weeks at the kitchen table using colored pencils. Elena bought them from the art supply store, not the dollar store, not the cheapest option, but the good ones, because Sienna had earned the good ones. The drawing showed a Honda Civic, 4 people inside. A woman in the driver's seat, a boy in the passenger seat, 2 smaller figures in the back, one holding a stuffed animal. Stars through the windshield, and written across the bottom in Sienna's careful handwriting, "Home is where Mom is." She won 2nd place. The ribbon hung on the refrigerator next to the drawing she'd given Damon a year earlier. 2 pictures of home. One drawn from a car. One drawn from a kitchen table. The distance between them was 3 months and one knock on a window. Kai started pre-kindergarten in the fall. He was 4 now, loud, fearless, completely unaware that a year and a half earlier, he'd been sleeping in a car seat in a church parking lot. On his first morning, he clung to Elena's leg at the classroom door and refused to let go. His teacher knelt down and offered her hand. Kai buried his face in Elena's knee. Elena knelt beside him. She took his face in both hands and looked him straight in the eyes. "Mama will be right here when you come back. I promise. Mama always comes back." Hey, Kai studied her face the way young children do, looking for the truth behind the words. Whatever he found was enough. He let go. He took the teacher's hand. He walked inside without looking back. Elena stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed. She pressed her back against the wall. She breathed. "Mama always comes back." She'd said it like a promise. It was. It had always been. Through several nights and shelters that said no, and a sister who couldn't help, and a car that ran out of gas, and a parking lot where nobody came, she always came back. 3 floors below Elena's apartment, Kendra Williams had her own lease now, a 2-bedroom unit. Her son started kindergarten at the same school as Kai. She was enrolled in the nursing assistant program at the same community college Elena had attended. She studied at her kitchen table at night the way Elena had studied, with cold coffee and flashcards, and the particular determination of a woman who'd been given a chance and refused to waste it. The chain had not stopped. Howard knocked on Elena's window. Elena knocked on Kendra's door. Kendra would knock on someone else's eventually. That's how it works. Kindness doesn't expire. It compounds. Damon flew to Chicago one Friday evening. Maeve Ellis was sitting at her kitchen table in the house on Harper Avenue in Hyde Park when he arrived. In her later years, small, alert, a cup of ginger tea in her hands and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked exactly the way she'd always looked to Damon, like a woman who'd seen everything the world could throw and decided to outlast it through sheer refusal to sit down. She hugged him at the door the way she always did, both arms, full grip. The hug of a woman who'd spent too many years working too many hours to take physical contact for granted. They sat at the table. Damon told her about Elena, about the old Civic and the 3 children and the church parking lot and several nights, about Howard crossing the street, about the hotel, about the 3 months in the practical nursing program and the apartment and Kendra and the chain. Maeve listened without interrupting. She held her tea with both hands and watched her son's face as he spoke, the way she'd watched him since he was a boy, reading what lived behind his words. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You remember the parking lot," she said. Damon nodded. "The grocery store in Halstead. I told you that night. Just tonight." Maeve said, "But it wasn't just one night." "I know, Mama. 3 weeks, 21 nights, and every morning I drove you to school and I prayed you wouldn't tell anyone. I prayed you wouldn't be ashamed of me. I prayed you'd forget." Damon reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were thin and warm and strong, the same hands that had braided his hair in the front seat of that old car, using a comb from the glove box. "I didn't forget," he said. "I know you didn't," Maeve said. "That's why you stopped." Damon looked at her. "You didn't help that woman because you're rich, Damon." Maeve's voice was clear and precise, the way it always was when she was saying something that mattered. "You helped her because you remember. That's the only difference between people who help and people who walk past. Memory. You remember what it sounded like when I cried at night and thought you were sleeping? You remember what the car smelled like? You remember what it felt like to be a child who knew his mother was pretending? And when you saw that woman in that car with those children, you remembered. And you couldn't walk past." Damon's throat tightened. He squeezed her hand. "Lila would have loved Elena," he said quietly. Maeve smiled, the kind of smile that holds grief and pride in equal measure. Lila did love Elena. She loved every person like Elena she ever met, every mother in those shelters, every child sleeping on a floor, every woman pretending everything was fine while the walls came down around her. That's why she became a nurse. That's why she volunteered. That's why she sat in that corner every week and read picture books until her voice was hoarse. Maeve paused. She looked at her son. "And that's why you are who you are now. Not because of the money, not because of the company, because you remember. Because Lila remembered. Because I remembered. We are people who remember, Damon. That's what I gave you. Not wealth, not opportunity, memory. The memory of what it's like to need help and not have it. And the choice, every single day, to make sure someone else doesn't have to carry that same memory alone. Damon sat with his mother in the kitchen in Hyde Park, holding her hand across a table that had held decades of meals and conversations and prayers, and felt something settle inside him that had been unsettled for years. Not closure. He didn't believe in closure. Closure was a word for people who'd never lost someone who mattered, but something close, something like peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that the people you love don't disappear when they die. They live in what you do next. Maeve squeezed his hand one more time. "Now finish your tea," she said. "It's getting cold." Elena drove to work one Tuesday morning in early March. The streets were empty, streetlights still on. The radio played low, something soft, something that sounded like the kind of song you'd hear in a kitchen where someone was cooking and didn't care if anyone was listening. She took the same avenue she'd driven countless times before, past the gas station where Howard had stopped, past the place where a man in an SUV had sat in the back seat and decided to cross a street, past the church with the sign that said, "All are welcome." She slowed down. In the church parking lot, a car sat alone. An old sedan, windows fogged from the inside, condensation on every pane, the same fog that only forms when people have been breathing inside a closed space for hours. Elena pulled over. She turned off the engine. She sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at that car. She thought about Howard, standing outside her window in the dark, hands raised, palms open. "I didn't ask if you're fine. I asked how long." She thought about Damon. "My mother was a nurse's aide too." She thought about Kendra, about food assistants split in half and evenings spent filling out forms. She thought about Malik, around 10 years old, pushing a car down the avenue in silence. About Sienna asking when they were going home. About Kai's cough in the cold. She thought about several nights. About 3 children who thought they were camping. About a knock on a window that changed everything. Elena opened the door. She stepped out into the early morning air. Memphis in March, cool but not cold. The sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. She walked across the parking lot. Her nurse's shoes were quiet on the asphalt. Her scrubs were clean. Her badge was clipped to her chest. Elena Voss, LPN, Memphis Regional Medical Center. She reached the car. She stood beside the driver's side window. She could see shapes through the fog. She could hear breathing. She raised her hand. And she knocked. Damon didn't save Elena. Howard didn't save Elena. Elena saved herself. What they gave her wasn't money or a home. It was 3 months of believing she was worth standing on solid ground. And what Elena gave back was something no amount of money could buy. Proof that kindness doesn't stop with the person who receives it. It moves. It knocks on the next window. It remembers. Several nights in a car. 3 children who thought they were camping. 1 knock on a window. That's all it took. Not to change a life, but to remind someone their life was worth changing. Thank you for walking with Elena through this journey. If this story reminded you that small acts of kindness can rewrite someone's future, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe. See you in the next one.